You see, I'm still trying to figure out how everything went so wrong, so I'm simply going to be honest with you about what occurred. My name is Kendra. At the age of 24, I believed I had everything worked out. I was dying inside, and Tyler and I had been together for 3 years. We lived in a small apartment that smelled like whatever our downstairs neighbor was cooking, like suffocating physically. Every day when he got home from work, he would settle down on our used couch and we would watch the same Netflix series as we ate. Neither of us felt like cooking, so we ordered takeout. The same routine each and every day. And while I sit here, I ask myself, is this it? Is this now my life? Here's the problem, though. I didn't want to be the witch that abruptly ends things with him. When you gripe about your day, Tyler truly listens and remembers to get your preferred coffee creamer without being asked. He's one of those really lovely people. Therefore, I couldn't simply say, hey, I'm bored, peace out. That would give the impression that the antagonist. Rather, I began doing what I do best, which is to blame him. Almost anything would irritate me. He left his work clothes on the bathroom floor and consumed his porridge in the morning. He even breathed too loudly when we were watching television. I realize it seems crazy, but I needed an excuse, don't I? I would say things like, you're just not the same person I fell in love with, or I feel like we're just roommates now. These are typical remarks that make guys feel uncomfortable. Try harder and panic. However, all of the Facebook posts were still couply needed to maintain appearances. People would remark on how adorable we were together, and I would roll my eyes inwardly as I heart their remarks. I was already looking at other possibilities on social media between us. You are aware of the situation. When you see who got divorced and who looks nice today, you start liking postings from former high school pals. It was then that I saw Jackson. Martinez, Jackson. Even his name sounded better than Tyler's, for heaven's sake. For my chemistry class, he was this guy. I may have spoken to him 5 times in my senior year, but he was always endearing in that bad boy manner, wore a leather jacket, rode a motorcycle, etc. Let's just say that his 3 years of marriage had been good to him because he had lately changed his relationship status to single and started sharing these gym photos. I thus began the process of getting back in touch with old friends, initially leaving naive remarks on his posts, then sending him direct messages with the traditional, oh, hey, how have you been? You not be familiar with the procedure. I'm getting Tyler ready for the big talk in the meantime. He's always more emotional on Sundays and anxious about the start of the work week, so I chose a Sunday night. I went all open, talking about how I never learned to trust people properly, how my dad left when I was 12, and other traumatizing things that men can't dispute. Informed him that before I could be the partner he deserved, I needed time to heal from the panic episodes I was having about our relationship. Tyler simply crushed his face. If we were breaking, he inquired. The deception was ideal because I said, no, baby, it's not a breakup. It's just temporary. I need to work on myself so I can love you properly. He would have been shocked by that. Don't work on yourself, please. He would appear to be a self-centered fool. Instead, he suggested couples therapy, but I quickly shot that down. Claimed that before we could fix us together, I had to fix myself. It sounded mature and healthy, but it was complete rubbish. At last, he consented to a trial separation, and I returned to temporarily at my parents' house. However, I'm constantly making expectations, such as telling him that he can't date other people just because we're not together. Even if we're working on ourselves separately, we're still dedicated. Additionally, he should stop messaging me excessively and give me some space. Additionally, he should continue to text me daily because if he doesn't, how can I tell he still cares? Yes, I realize that seems crazy today, but I thought it made great sense at the time. I took pictures of myself crying while I packed my belongings in order for me to upload them later along, with a quotation about healing and personal development. Tyler continued asking me whether I was certain about this while assisting me with carrying boxes to my car. When I saw how hurt he appeared, I nearly felt horrible. However, I became enthusiastic about my upcoming journey after recalling Jackson's most recent Instagram post. When Tyler appeared to be such a wonderful guy, my parents couldn't understand why I was returning home. However, I told them I was having problems and needed their help, and I fed them the same mental health line. The guest room was prepared by mom and continued to inquire about Tyler's and my true well being. I reassured her that it was only a phase of growing up. I was innocently catching up with Jackson via text that first night in my childhood bedroom until around 2 o'clock IE. However, I had already scheduled a time for us to meet in person. As usual, Tyler texted me good night, and I responded with a heart emoji while also giggling about something Jackson had said. Although the purpose of the isolation was to promote healing, I must admit that I felt more alive, more than I had in some months. I was planning to meet Jackson 3 days after returning home. In a manner that Tyler never experienced, the thrill of skulking around made everything feel electrifying. Halfway between our towns, in this parking lot of a gas station, we had our first meeting. He kept praising my appearance, stating that he always found me attractive in high school. After 3 years of Tyler seeing me in sweats, it felt fantastic. Likely a lie. I made up complex cover tales for Tyler and my parents, work, meetings with former girlfriends, therapy sessions, and interviews. When mom inquired about my progress in therapy, I would pretend to be in Jackson's place, learning things that I was very definitely not learning in therapy. I suppressed the guilt by changing the past, even though it was there at the beginning. Tyler was domineering, uninteresting, and assumed I was his. I felt wanted and unique because of Jackson. When you have to defend your behavior, it's remarkable how quickly you can convince yourself that your relationship was awful. Tyler stayed on, but the hook, usually after spending time with Jackson, sweet texts about missing him and thoughtful, melancholy selfies are common. It was a crazy contrast, beaming with delight and attention, then instantly going into injured bird mode for Tyler's advantage. My sister realized something was wrong. She would comment on how well I appeared to be doing mentally when she saw me getting ready for alleged therapy sessions. I called her a jealous witch in my mind for doubting my narrative. Peak manipulation, self-discovery, mantras, and sunset photos with healing journey comments were among the Facebook posts. While I was organizing my next meeting with Jackson, people would leave encouraging comments. I continued changing the goalposts, while Tyler kept asking when I would be ready to resume our relationship. 2 weeks turned into a month, which turned into 2 months. He had always expressed disappointment while claiming to understand. God, I'd nearly lost my temper with his patience. Jackson was everything but patient, demanding and intense made me sense that he would find someone else to see if I wasn't accessible when he wanted to. I was captivated by that risk. The chemistry of the physical world was crazy. Everything was more passionate than anything with Tyler because of all that skulking around. In order to get through my difficult time, I began spending the night at Jackson's and pretended to my parents that I was having sleepovers with pals. In the belief that I was having therapeutic girl time, mom would pack care packages. Irony was unthinkable. As time passed, I grew increasingly certain that I had discovered my exit plan. My safety net was Tyler. My future lay with Jackson. All I had to do was figure out when to make the change without coming across as the villain. What came next was something I didn't have time for. On a Tuesday morning, while I was throwing up and my mother knocked to check if I had food poisoning, I discovered I was pregnant. After 3 pregnancy tests, I was on the floor of my bedroom having a total meltdown. Everything was exacerbated by the time as I had been with Tyler and Jackson during the same few weeks. During one of our relationship check-ins, Tyler and I became physical, and I acted like the devoted girlfriend who was missing her partner. Jackson and I had also been rather busy. I honestly had no idea whose child this was. My initial reaction was utter panic, which was followed by anger. How could this have occurred at the same time that I was figuring out my life? This may sound insane, but I was really mad at both of them for placing me in this situation. The saddest aspect was knowing that my ideal victim story was going to break apart. When you've been engaging in clearly non-healing activities with someone who isn't your boyfriend, it's difficult to say you're taking time to recover. I thought that perhaps this would lead to something more serious, that perhaps the world was telling us we were destined to be together, so I drove to Jackson's that same day. He was hot and sweating when I spotted him working on his motorcycle. I was momentarily sidetracked by the thought that this might be our life, but his face became white when I told him about the pregnancy. The sort of startled, the frightened type. He started asking me right away if I was certain, if I had considered taking care of it, and if it might belong to someone else. Then he really dropped the bomb. For the sake of their child, he had been discussing a reconciliation with his ex wife. His Facebook status said that their divorce was complete, although it wasn't. I wasn't his fresh beginning. I was merely his recovery from his midlife crisis. I went totally crazy, began yelling that he was cheating on me and destroying my relationship with Tyler for no reason, how he was similar to another man who takes advantage of women. He advised me to relax, but I could see by the look in his eyes that he no longer wanted to interact with me. I tried trying to phone him when I was driving home, but he didn't pick up. He had blocked my number by that evening. Social media was also restricted the following morning. My escape plan fell through, and I was left with nothing to do but hold the greatest secret of my life. I began to realize that I would have to tell Tyler everything, not only the pregnancy, but the entire deception. I'd been alive for some months. Tyler was unable to simply block me and act as though I didn't exist, unlike Jackson. Everything was going to be destroyed by this. However, I had to first figure out how to tell this story without coming across as the antagonist. Spent the same couple weeks with Jackson and Tyler. I was acting like the devoted girlfriend who was missing her partner during one of our relationship check-in chats, and Tyler and I ended up getting physical. Additionally, Jackson and I had been busy and in good health, so I honestly had no idea whose baby this was. My initial reaction was one of utter panic, which was quickly followed by anger. How could this have happened to me just as I was starting to sort out my life? I realized this seems strange, but I was really mad at both of them for placing me in this situation, as if they had both let me down in some way. The worst part was knowing that my ideal victim story was about to fall apart and that I had to tell everyone. Claiming to be taking time to mend yourself is difficult when you've been engaging in clearly non-healing activities with someone who isn't your partner. In the hopes that this might lead to something more serious, perhaps the cosmos was telling us we were destined to be together. I drove to Jackson's house that same day to tell him. I discovered him in his garage, hot and sweating, working on his motorcycle. I was momentarily sidetracked by the thought that this might be our life, but his face became white when I told him about the pregnancy. It was frightened, not the good kind of stunned. Began right away, asking if I was certain, if I had considered taking care of it, or if it might belong to someone else. My mental love dream was shattered in an instant. Then he really dropped the bomb. For the benefit of their children, he had been discussing a reconciliation with his ex-wife. Their divorce was not as official as his Facebook post indicated, it seems. I wasn't his fresh beginning. I was merely his recovery from his midlife crisis. I went totally crazy, began yelling at him for sabotaging my relationship with Tyler and leading me on about how he was just like all the other men who take advantage of women and then discard them. I could see by the look in his eyes that he no longer wanted to be around me, even though he encouraged me to relax and that we would work things out. I tried trying to phone him when I was driving home, but he didn't pick up. He had blocked my number by that evening. He also blocked me on social media the following morning. My escape plan vanished in an instant, leaving me with nothing to do but keep the most important secret of my life. The fact that I would have to tell began to set in. Everything, Tyler. It was about the entire deception I'd been living for months, not just the pregnancy. Tyler was unable to simply block me and act as though I didn't exist, unlike Jackson. We shared friends, responsibilities, and 3 years of history. Everything was going to be destroyed by this. However, I had to first figure out how to tell this story without coming across as the antagonist. I'm not proud of the manipulation that went into the 3 days I spent figuring out how to break the news of the pregnancy to Tyler. I, I picked his birthday weekend since I knew he would be feeling upbeat, and we were meant to get together anyhow to see how things were going with our separation. We went on our first date at our old downtown coffee shop, where I met him. Strategic decision, many pleasant recollections there. He couldn't cause a scene because it was a public spot. Land, that is neutral. I appeared suitably upset, as though I had been crying and hadn't slept, which wasn't difficult because I hadn't slept for days. The vulnerability approach was where I started. Explained to him how I talked about how I'd missed him, how being apart had made me realize how much he meant to me, and how I'd messed up while attempting to find myself out. In an attempt to portray it as a moment of weakness rather than months of deliberate deceit, I was gradually leading up to the major revelations. Reaching out to grasp his hand, I whispered, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to hear. I made a mistake with someone from my past, and it just happened once, and I was upset and bewildered. I quickly regretted it. Tyler simply waited for me to finish speaking without removing his hand or interrupting. He seemed frighteningly calm. I stammered, I'm pregnant, and then hurriedly added, and I don't know what to do. There was a long pause. I was more alarmed by Tyler's expression remaining the same than if he had begun to yell. When I finally told him, he inquired, how far along? And I watched him mentally calculate the answer. 3 weeks before, to my most recent visit, we had been intimate, so the timing could technically work for any situation, but I could tell he knew by the look in his eyes. He's always had an eye for detail. Who is he? Tyler inquired, maintaining his composed tone. I handed the sanitized version to him. I had reconnected with an old high school acquaintance online. When I was feeling lost and perplexed about our relationship, I had a weakness, made it seem like a one-time error rather than the continuous problem it was. Tyler then began to ask the questions I was afraid to ask. How much time had I spent conversing with this man? Did I want the breakup for this reason? Had I orchestrated this entire situation? He was piecing together the puzzle pieces I had worked so hard to scatter, so every inquiry was like a knife. I became defensive and retaliated against him. You are questioning me as if I were a criminal while I'm going through a horrible experience. I expected you to be more encouraging, a classic move, make him feel bad for reacting to the betrayal in a normal way. Tyler, however, didn't believe it. He inquired further, and my narrative kept unraveling. Why hadn't I previously brought up getting back in touch with former friends? Why did I constantly have to travel to the next town for my treatment appointments? At what precise moment did this one-time error occur? The fact that he wasn't simply accepting my explanation and going on infuriated me. We were apart, you see. We weren't even together when this occurred. Technically, I made a mistake while attempting to understand my sentiments. However, I'm here today to be honest with you and attempt to resolve the matter. Were you or were we apart? Cheating? Tyler inquired. And that inquiry struck a different chord. Yes, I had taken care to refer to it as a separation rather than a split, especially so I could use him as a fallback while I looked into other possibilities. The discussion quickly deteriorated. I attempted to establish some sort of equivalency by bringing up his previous transgressions, instances in which he had disappointed me or wounded my feelings, but he simply sat there, listening, refusing to fall for the ploy, and becoming too emotional for me to play the victim. He concluded by saying, I need some time to think about this. He went out, just left the coffee shop as I sat there, alone and pregnant with my half-finished latte, realizing that my manipulative techniques had totally failed. He informed me via text that evening that he would be spending some time with his cousin. No drama, no rage, just a straightforward assertion of reality. That seemed worse to me somehow than if he had cursed at me or threatened to abandon me. It seemed definitive. There was nothing but despair for the following 2 weeks. I launched because I realized I was losing control of everything, attempting to handle the matter from all sides and going into full damage control. I called Tyler's mother first. I assumed that if I could win his family around to my cause, they would put pressure on him to make amends because I knew she had always liked me. I told her that I was terrified and confused and that I simply needed Tyler's support at this trying time, playing up the pregnancy hormones angle. Gave the impression that we had a minor altercation that had been exaggerated. She addressed incisive questions on the separation while remaining sympathetic and why Tyler was so distressed. The same sanitized version was what I offered her: an old buddy, a moment of weakness, instant regret, the need for forgiveness, and an opportunity to put things right. After that, I began working on social media, shared ambiguous sayings about forgiveness and second chances, the difficulties of relationships, and the hardships of an unplanned pregnancy. I hoped that by portraying myself as the helpless, expectant mother in need of sympathy rather than the unfaithful girlfriend who wrecked her own life, I would garner public support, connection. However, I was also unable to let go of Jackson. I knew where he worked, despite the fact that he blocked me everywhere. I arrived at his workplace during lunchtime with the hope that if I could speak with him directly and remind him of our relationship, he would take the initiative and we could work things out. It was a catastrophe. He was embarrassed that I had turned up at his place of employment, dragged me aside, and unequivocally stated that he had no interest in me or the child, claimed to be figuring things out. I had to move on from his ex-wife. His coworker began staring as I broke down in tears and caused a commotion. I was ultimately escorted from the property by security. Although the humiliation was heartbreaking, it strengthened my resolve to win Tyler back. Tyler had to be my happily ever after, if Jackson wasn't. I couldn't blow up my life and then be pregnant and alone with nothing to show for it. As I began leaving voicemails for Tyler, lengthy digressions in which I apologized and explained how I had grown from my. Regardless of the biological father's identity, we could raise this child together despite our flaws. I assured him that I would stop at nothing to put things right, go to therapy, relocate anywhere he desired, do whatever it required. However, I also began to subtly threaten. What would people think if he left me when I was pregnant? Everyone who knew us, including his relatives and friends, would view him as the man who dumped his pregnant fiancée. I reminded him that when his mother was expecting his younger sister, his own father had abandoned her, and how their family had suffered greatly as a result. When Tyler's cousin played one of my voicemails for their family group chat, the threats backfired catastrophically. In a single message, everyone heard me shift from being kind and sorry to being cunning and menacing. I received a direct text from Tyler's sister ordering me to stop bothering her brother and to seek assistance. My own family also began to grow weary of my drama. At first, my parents had been encouraging, but as the details became clearer and they began to piece it together, they grew increasingly irritated with me. I was explicitly asked by my mother if I had been unfaithful to Tyler. She simply shook her head and expressed her disappointment in me when I told her the same story about her moment of vulnerability. Even blunter was my sister. I made my bed, she said, and now I had to lie in it, that Tyler was worthy of better than what I had caused him. Stated that I needed to start accepting responsibility for my decisions and quit attempting to control everyone. But I couldn't believe I was solely to blame for this. Tyler was, in my mind, being obstinate and unforgiving. Jackson led me on because he was a coward. When I needed my family's support the most, they weren't providing it. I was going through the most difficult period of my life, and everyone was failing me. Controlling the story and making sure that everyone understood that I was the victim here became my obsession. I wrote more about the difficulties of being pregnant and by yourself, as well as how to discover your true friends when things go tough. However, I wasn't getting the sympathy I was hoping for. Individuals were beginning to see through the manipulation. When I learned that Tyler was doing pretty well from common acquaintances, it was the last straw. He had begun attending treatment, exercising frequently, and making progress in his career. He appeared lighter, happier, and more self assured, according to others. I anticipated him to be sulking and pleading with me to return, but he wasn't. In fact, he was doing very well without me. I thought I might have lost him forever at that point. And the panic struck full force. It was like seeing my entire life fall apart in slow motion over the course of the following several months. And the worst, the best part was watching Tyler thrive without me, not simply get by. I got a glimpse of his new life through mutual connections and social media, and it was everything I'd told myself he couldn't do. It seems that he had been attending therapy twice a week to address what he referred to as relationship trauma. I was clearly the trauma he was healing from, so that hurt. He joined a gym and shared progress photos online, demonstrating his growing physique after receiving a promotion at work he was considering returning to school. He appeared different in every way, confident, joyful, and driven. The actual knife to the heart then arrived. I discovered that a friend was seeing someone else on Instagram about 4 months after our separation. She was Sarah, and she was everything I had always criticized women for: basic interests, basic work, and basic style. The type of girl who considered posting photos of her coffee to be content. However, I had never seen Tyler look so sincere with her as he did with me. Not at all. Genuine delight, not the desperate, overcompensating, trying to be happy bliss of someone. They were going to farmers markets, hiking, and trying out new eateries, among other typical activities. When Tyler proposed that we do it together, everything I had been complaining about seemed dull. I developed an obsession with following their relationship on the internet. Since Sarah's Instagram was open to the world, I would spend hours dissecting each post, each comment Tyler made, and each photo of the two of them. They appeared so at ease and at ease with one another. No games, no drama, no manipulation. Just two individuals who truly delighted in one another's company. My life, meanwhile, was collapsing in every manner. Even though being pregnant while single was extremely stressful, I couldn't afford to work less hours. Without Tyler's income, the costs were mounting, and I was forced to relocate into a small one-bedroom apartment in a dubious area of town. The event at Jackson's workplace damaged my reputation in the workplace. Word spread about the insane pregnant woman who had created a commotion, and it returned to individuals in my field. In the end, I was forced to accept a lower paying job at a smaller corporation where no one was aware of my background. But worst of all was the isolation. Despite our tense connection, my parents were still in my life. They were fed up with the continual turmoil I brought to family get togethers and disappointed in the decisions I had made. My sister claimed she couldn't cope with my victim complex and negativity, so she hardly ever spoke to me anymore. The majority of my friends had also gradually disappeared, as often happens when your whole people cease wanting to hang out when your personality turns into a whine about how unjust life is treating you. My incessant demand for approval and support without ever offering anything in return wore down the few friends who made an effort to keep the friendship going. I tried using dating apps in the hopes of finding someone who might be interested in joining a pre-existing family. However, being overtly pregnant and harboring resentment toward your former partner does not exactly make you attractive on Tinder. The few men who were compatible with me were obviously only interested in simple hookups with someone they thought was in need. The actual pregnancy turned into a continual reminder of how horribly I had messed up my life. Every doctor's visit by itself, every ultrasound image without nobody to show it to, every twitch, and kick made by a baby whose father didn't want to interact with us. Instead of admitting that my decisions had caused this, I began to resent the pregnancy, viewing it as the reason my ideal plan had failed. But when I was around 7 months old, the worst thing ever happened. At the grocery store, she met Tyler and Sarah, who were pregnant. I looked awful, wore baggy pregnancy clothes that made me appear even more pregnant and pitiful. And I hadn't slept well in weeks. They appeared to have just left a fitness session together. All joyful, healthy, and radiant, Tyler was courteous but aloof. In that cautious manner, folks asked someone they used to know how I was doing. Sarah was very nice, asking when I was expecting and congratulated me on my pregnancy. She appeared sincere, which in some way made it worse than if I could have hated her as a witch. They were discussing a weekend hiking trip they had planned while purchasing supplies for a fancy supper they were preparing together. Their entire exchange demonstrated how at ease and safe they were in each other's company. Tyler posted photos of their travels and introduced Sarah to individuals they met. It was obvious that he wasn't keeping their relationship a secret or considering it as a passing phase. Standing there by myself in the cereal aisle, obviously pregnant, I finally realized that Tyler was not returning after seeing the life he had created without me. This romance wasn't a rebound or a phase. He had truly moved on and discovered a happier person than I had ever known. It dawned on me that I had thrown away a fine man who loved me for an unrealized fantasy. For 3 years, Tyler had been dependable, encouraging, and understanding of my erratic behavior. He was prepared to start a life with me, but I ruined it in my quest for approval and excitement from a person who considered me expendable. Even though my life was utterly destroyed, I was unable to believe that I was solely to blame. Tyler's failure to put up a stronger fight for our relationship still infuriated me. I'm still upset with Jackson for guiding me. I'm still sure that if people truly cared about me, they wouldn't have abandoned me when I needed them most, but would have stood by me through my faults. 2 months later, the kid was born, and the paternity test supported my suspicions. The father was Jackson, not believed it was significant since he had expressed his desire to be excluded from our lives. I gave the kid the name Aiden and made an effort to persuade myself that I didn't need anybody else and that being a single mother was strong. However, as I was nursing Aiden alone myself in my small apartment late at night, I would browse social media and see if Tyler and Sarah's lives were still going strong. They were discussing getting engaged, had moved in together, and had adopted a dog. Tyler appeared to have fully changed. He was self-assured, settled, and truly happy. I held on to waiting for their ideal relationship to fall apart just like mine did and for karma to strike. However, it never took place. While I battled alone with the fallout from my decisions, they continued to be happy together. I still find it difficult to acknowledge that I was entirely responsible for my own suffering.